LEAP, was developed and testing began in conjunction with the sophisticated Aegis system. LEAP would eventually lead to several successful tests against ballistic missile targets and become Aegis Ballistic Missile Defense, using the standard Missile 3 to pulverize a ballistic missile. The first Block 1 system was delivered in October 2004, and an Aegis 3.0 update delivered in 2005. The world's best air defense system had just gotten the capability to knock ballistic missiles out of the sky. Aegis BMD would prove so successful that Aegis Ashore was developed as a land-based component, with a NATO Aegis Ashore ballistic missile defense system site being built in Romania and in Poland. On May 21, 2014, Aegis Ashore successfully detected, tracked, and destroyed a ballistic missile target. Aegis Ballistic Missile Defense, whether ashore or at sea, uses the RIM-161 Standard Missile 3 for mid-course interceptions, and the RIM-156 Standard Extended Range Block 4 for the terminal phase interceptions. An interceptor is launched from a vertical launch cell and guided to its target by its home ship or Aegis Ashore facility, and then it collides with an enemy missile with over 130 megajoules of kinetic energy, requiring no explosive charge. Interceptions inside of the atmosphere or during the terminal phase of an attack carry blast fragmentation warheads, since the re-entry vehicle of a missile is much smaller than the larger ballistic missile body that needs to be destroyed during the mid-course in order to neutralize the threat. The benefit of Aegis ballistic missile defense when mounted on ships is that ships are mobile and thus can be quickly repositioned to defend likely target areas or be closer to a likely launch site, as it's better to target a ballistic missile as early as possible to avoid it deploying countermeasures. The ability to reposition your ballistic missile defenses is greatly valued by the U.S. Navy, as is the ability to help cover facilities or locations that might be left vulnerable either because no other defenses exist or because mid-course defenses have failed. A terminal phase interceptor fired from an Aegis-equipped ship might be the last-ditch effort that saves your city from nuclear annihilation. The US, Japan, Romania, and Poland all have Aegis Ashore facilities, and the US Navy has 5 Ticonderoga-class cruisers and 28 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers equipped with ballistic missile defense capabilities. These ships are split up, with 17 assigned to the Pacific Fleet and 16 to the Atlantic Fleet. Future shipbuilding plans, however, call for 80 to 97 total ships to be equipped with ballistic missile defense capabilities within the next 30 years. This is driven not just from fears of nuclear attack, but by the necessity of protecting the U.S. Navy from China's ever-evolving anti-ship ballistic missiles. China's missiles represent a serious threat to America and could push the U.S. Navy out of the South Pacific for good, if not counter. The U.S. has also helped Japan equip 4 of its ships with ballistic missile defense capabilities, and this number is also expected to rise in response to the development of North Korean nuclear weapons and the Chinese threat. The next layer of protection for the United States is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD as it's also known. It was first proposed in 1987 as a mobile ballistic missile defense system. At the time, the problem with ballistic missile defenses was that they were vulnerable to conventional attack as their locations were well known. Adding mobility not only increased survivability, but also allowed the U.S. Army to move them to locations where no other ballistic missile defense capabilities existed. At first, THAAD failed miserably, scoring only 2 successful intercepts out of 8 tests. However, as the technology matured, the success rate increased to nearly 100%. Though again, the system has been criticized for not tackling realistic threats, making full use of dummies and countermeasures. This hasn't stopped the system from being exported to U.S. bases around the world, and even for use with partner nations such as Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, where it's intercepted a Houthi ballistic missile in 2022, South Korea, Romania, and Israel. THAAD works much the same way as any other terminal phase defense system. Its powerful AN/TPY-2 X-band radar tracks the target as it flies through space, and once it's plotted where and when the target will re-enter the atmosphere, it launches an interceptor. The interceptor is then guided to the target by the radar, where it uses a kinetic warhead to smash the incoming missile to pieces. THAAD is believed to be so effective that China has complained about its deployment to South Korea, despite U.S. assurances that its goal is to protect the nation from North Korean nuclear weapons. Next, the U.S. has one final line of defense for ballistic missile intercepts, the U.S. Army Patriot Missile Defense Battery. Originally, the Patriot system was meant to take on airborne threats, but as the threat grew to include cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, the system was evolved to allow it to destroy these faster, nimbler targets. As a replacement to the Nike Hercules system, the Patriot is now the U.S. Army's only line of defense against airborne targets. The Patriot's main appeal is its ease of setup, requiring less than an hour to prepare for operation. All of its components, including fire control, which itself includes radar, engagement control station, antenna mast group, and electric power plant, and the launchers are all truck or trailer mounted, giving them great mobility. The Patriot uses an AMPQ-53 and ANMPQ-65 passively electronically scanned array radars, which are faster and more efficient than older mechanically scanning arrays like the type you've probably seen deployed on Russian vehicles inside Ukraine. The ANMPQ-65 radar features a second traveling wave tube, which amplifies the radar signal and gives it more power to track and detect hostile threats. Unlike similar SAM units, the Patriot uses only a single unit to search, identify, track, and engage targets, while other systems use multiple radars to do the same job. The Patriot's radar beam is very narrow in comparison with traditional radar dishes. This, however, allows it to focus more energy in a smaller space, which in turn allows it to better detect and track small, very agile, and high-speed targets such as missiles. The radar also has increased effectiveness against stealth aircraft, and the focused beam is very resistant to attempts to jam it or interfere with its operation. If the system detects it's being jammed, it quickly changes frequencies to avoid the jamming signal, repeating as necessary to provide good data to intercepting missiles. Patriot missiles work much the same way as any other terminal phase defense system by launching a missile on an intercept course with an incoming target. This is a short-range defense only, though, and it can only protect a small geographic location and only during the terminal phase of a ballistic missile's flight. In essence, Patriot batteries are the last line of defense when all other options have failed. The current state of U.S. ballistic missile defenses leaves some serious doubts as to whether protecting from a nuclear attack is realistically feasible. To date, successful intercepts have been carried out under very controlled conditions, and there's a lot of reason to doubt that any of these systems would be able to defeat a modern ballistic missile equipped with a full host of countermeasures. Even if capable of doing so, each intercept would require multiple salvos of interceptors for redundancy, which means that even with the full complement of U.S. ballistic missile defenses operating at peak efficiency, only small pockets of the U.S. homeland could be offered some measure of protection in the case of an all-out nuclear war. Compared with the ballistic missile defense capabilities of other nations, though, this might be all that's needed for the United States to survive as a nation, and to do so in far better state than any of its potential adversaries. To be truthful, though, that's not saying much, as the global consequences of a full nuclear exchange will likely trigger human extinction anyway. This brings up the question of if ballistic missile defense is even worth it, especially considering the extreme cost. To try to improve ballistic missile defense in the future, the U.S. is already looking at new technologies. During the 2000s, the U.S. experimented with an airborne laser concept, essentially just a Boeing 747 equipped with a massive laser on its nose. The airborne laser solved many of the problems of ballistic missile defense, namely the difficulty in guiding a kill vehicle to its target, when both it and the target are flying at hypersonic speeds and over great distances. The airborne laser could instead target a missile during its most vulnerable phase, the boost phase, and destroy it at the speed of light. In multiple tests, the airborne laser successfully destroyed ballistic missiles and other airborne targets. However, ultimately the project was scrapped in 2010 due to numerous problems. First, the laser was only effective at very short ranges due to atmospheric scattering. So, as Secretary of Defense Robert Gates stated, if the laser was to be used to intercept missiles from Iran, it would have to be orbiting inside of Iran's national borders to do so. Secondly, in order to successfully defend against ballistic missile threats from a single hostile country, a fleet of 10 to 20 of the aircraft would be required at a cost of $1.5 billion each, and costing $100 million a year to operate. The airborne laser was officially dead, but the data gained from testing has been invaluable in developing other directed energy weapons. In fact, the concept of an airborne laser has now been once again resurrected, only this time with the laser mounted on very high-altitude unmanned drones. These drones would fly at altitudes far in excess of large jet aircraft, such as the original test platform, and at such heights would maintain laser beam integrity over longer ranges. An unmanned drone flying at 65,000 feet would be able to engage targets as far away as hundreds of kilometers, and a fleet of smaller unmanned drones would be cheaper to procure and operate. They also could fly for very long periods of time through airborne refueling. As technology improves, we might once again see the return of the canceled airborne laser program, albeit in a much different form than predicted by its original builders. It's even possible that these lasers could be installed on low Earth satellites, and this would in fact be the most efficient method of ballistic missile defense. However, doing so would prompt other nations to begin arming their own satellites and create a space weapons race. Inevitably, in order to protect from space-based interception, nuclear weapons would be technologically move to space themselves, where they can be dropped straight down onto targets below, making most forms of interception impossible or mostly useless. But as it stands today, while the US could probably successfully defend from an attack by a rogue state such as North Korea, there's little hope of surviving even a moderate exchange of nuclear weapons after hundreds of billions spent in ballistic missile defense. Now, go check out What If There Was a Nuclear War Between the US and Russia to find out just how bad you're in trouble. Or click this other video instead.